I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Throws up with the head. Intercepted. 30. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25. 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And there the cannons go. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome, Bucs fans, to a midweek edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Rhett Matthew, joined alongside me, my good buddy and co-host from BucsNation.com, Evan Wanish. I think I'm getting better at that. Today we are going to catch you up on all the latest Tampa Bay Buccaneers headlines and news as we head into Week 2's game against the Detroit Lions. The Bucs coming off of a very impressive 37-20 victory over the Washington Commanders, but came at a little bit of a cost, Evan. Today we're going to catch you up on some of the latest injury updates, and we will dive into some more talking points that have kept the Bucs in the news cycle this week. First and foremost, though, welcome back, my friend. How you doing?
Doing pretty good, and I'm doing better than the Buccaneers injury report is. We'll get into that, but it is an extensive injury report with a lot of notable names on there. So some guys will be able to play. I'm not saying all of them guys that we're going to mention are going to be out, but there's definitely some notable names that are probably going to be missing Sunday's game against a Detroit team that is arguably, one of the best in the NFL. So it is going to be a challenge on the road for sure.
Got a couple of topics we would like you guys to weigh in on today. Give us a call. The phones are on. The Autograph fan line, 305-224-1968. The meeting ID on your screen, 747-973-0150. You can also reach us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those Cannon Fire Podcast. And if you're really old-fashioned, you can send us an email. That thing still works, cannonfirepodcast@gmail.com. So let's dive into some Tampa Bay Buccaneer news. And I think the biggest injury of the news was something that flew under a lot of people's radar after that Week 1 game had ended, and that was Antoine Winfield Jr., who the Bucs announced suffered an injury at the end of the game, one of the final two plays of the game. He was wearing a boot after the game and was not at practice out there today with the team. So the report is that he is likely going to miss some time. Now, I've seen couple of different reports on how much time that may be, but it seems like at least a couple of weeks here for the all-pro safety.
It does appear to be a couple of weeks, but I think the positive sign is that the Buccaneers have not put him on IR. They could have put him on IR, which would have meant automatically out 4 games. They did not do that, so that tells me that they are optimistic that this is possibly something that will be less than 4 games. So I do think that there is some varying things. Some people think, it'll be like, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. There's some people think it'll be more on the side of like 4 or so. I think they want to play it cautious, right? It is a sprained ankle / foot, I believe, is the injury. So they want to be cautious. They know that, look, it's just Week 1, and it sucks that you have these injuries after Week 1, but at the same time, you have an entire season ahead of you. So you don't want to really be messing with this stuff now, because you put him back out there before he's ready, and then next thing you know, he's out for the season when he's, shouldn't be out there right now. So I do think they want to play it cautious, but it is a good sign to me that they didn't put him on IR, because they very well could have.
Yeah, Zion McCollum also suffered a concussion during the first half of Week 1's game, and Josh Hayes had an ankle injury. He did not return. No Josh Hayes at practice today for the Bucs, but Zion McCollum was out there with a no-contact jersey. So I would say for him to go through the rest of concussion protocol and play in Week 2, the jury is still out, but the fact that he is out there today practicing, albeit in a non-contact jersey, going through the motions, the more reserves, the better. So I guess, you love to see him out there.
It's always tricky with the concussion things, right? Because that's not really a feel thing. That's a NFL league-wide concussion protocol thing that he has to pass through the steps. So they never actually confirmed that he did have a concussion. It was just he was ruled out of the game with a concussion. They never confirmed that it was officially, this guy has a concussion. So perhaps they dodged a bullet there. And he's a guy that, especially with all the other injuries, they're probably going to need on Sunday.
Yeah, Bryce Hall was another corner who went down in that secondary. and his season is likely over. It is what exactly is the injury? I know you know what it is.
Yeah, I Bleav it is something with his fibula. He had
And a
suffered the
patella
same
tendon.
injury in college. He had suffered the same exact injury. Really tough break for him. Just brutal stuff. The Bucs, I know, were excited about him. They signed him as a depth corner, and he was playing a good bit and looked decent in the preseason. And it is unfortunate that he's not really going to have a shot here with the Bucs, this season, because while Bowles didn't exactly say that he would be out for the season, but he basically alluded that it'd be very unlikely that he would be back at some point this season. So the Bucs did put him on IR, opened up a roster spot though, which they made a corresponding move to that.
Yeah, it was a dislocated right ankle and a fractured fibula for Bryce Hall, who, like you said, his season may likely be over. But the Buccaneers did re-sign former undrafted free agent Keenan Isaac, who, to be honest with you, I thought had a decent preseason, made a couple of plays here and there, popped up, and when the final cuts came around, I think Keenan Isaac was a name that at least a couple of people had tossed around, because he definitely stepped up, I think, during the preseason in the time he was on the field.
I thought he played well as well. I thought he had a good camp, good preseason, had the interception in the Cincinnati game in the preseason. This comes after he had a good camp preseason last year because he had made the team right out of camp. This year, it wasn't quite the case. He actually got put on waivers by the Buccaneers. The Bucs were hoping to bring him back to the practice squad. Did not happen, though, as the Carolina Panthers and Dave Canales actually claimed him off of waivers. He spent about a week there and then was released again by the Panthers, and that's where, luckily for the Bucs, they were very fortunate that they were able to pick up a corner. I saw a lot of people, they got to sign Patrick Peterson, or they got to sign Xavier Howard, or this guy, that guy. Look, like, they could do that all they want. It's not helping them. They're not helping in Detroit on Sunday. Like, that's not how that's going to work. You're not going to be able to learn a defense and play and actually contribute at all 3 or 4 days later. So it would take time if they signed one of those guys. I think they're very fortunate that a guy like Isaac is familiar with the defense already, so he can hopefully step in and provide just some depth for this team that is clearly lacking it right now.
Now, Todd Bowles addressed it a little bit today. He said, if we have to get somebody, we'll get somebody. But, the prospect of actually signing someone and bringing in some outside help, I don't think is as far-fetched as some would seem, just because if the Bucs are this thin 2-3 weeks from now, and Antoine Winfield Jr., his status obviously still up in the air, but more so this cornerback room, because your starting safeties this week are probably going to be Jordan Whitehead and Christian Izien. You're not going to have Christian Izien playing outside corner, which is completely native to him like it was in week 1. Hopefully you get some more experience in that cornerback room. But, I mean, if they stay this thin for a while and guys just keep getting hurt, sooner or later, I feel like you're going to have to bring somebody in.
Eventually, right? And I think it was something similar in the 2021 season, when like the Bucs corners was dropping like flies, and everybody was like, "Oh, sign Richard Sherman," and they were like, "Oh, well, like hold on, right?" And then I think there was another injury that happened, and then you're like, "Okay, well, now you do." And especially with a guy like Jamel Dean, who hasn't exactly had the greatest track record of staying 100% healthy throughout a season. Depending on how long some of these other guys' injuries are, if another one goes down, they may not have a choice. But the sign, and look, just because it may not be a Patrick Peterson or an Xavier Howard, it may not be a name that you recognize. They worked out, I Bleav Trey Herndon was a guy they actually worked out. He's been a veteran in the NFL for a little bit. It could be a guy like that, but and eventually, I mean, push comes to shove, you might have to kind of force your hand, in a way. So hopefully it doesn't come to that, right? Hopefully the Bucs can stay healthy enough, and this is the guys that they're rolling with, and they're good enough, and they're healthy enough to be able to play. Hopefully it doesn't have to come to that, because that's a last resort thing. Those guys are available right now for a reason. So hopefully it doesn't. But if it does have to come to that, I do think, and the Bucs have shown that, like, they will, just like Todd Bowles said. If you have to get a guy, you have to get a guy.
No, I agree with you 100%. Let's not forget undrafted rookie free agent Tyreek Funderburk also going to be available for Sunday's game. Along the defensive line there, no Calijah Kancey out at practice today, but defensive tackle Logan Hall was out there after leaving Sunday's game with an injury. And then, of course, we did already mention Zion McCollum out there with a non-contact jersey on. So there is the injury wrap-up for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You would think it was week 7. with all of these all of these injuries here on the defensive side of the football. But let's get into some more news here, and this one is exciting because I have been on this train since probably 2020. I think this take was cemented when Tom Brady came to Tampa, and you might already know what I'm getting at here. I mean, by the title of our episode, you can probably tell. But listen, back in 2017, I was saying that Mike Evans was a top 3 wide receiver in the NFL. I just wanted to be known that I liked Mike Evans before it was cool. Well, Kyle Brandt on Good Morning Football this week had a little bit to say about Mike Evans, and he went on X first. He said that it was too hot for the platform, so people had to, kind of get him to spit it out. Well, he spits it out on Good Morning Football. We got the audio for you here. Let me play it for you.
I think Mike Evans was a Hall of Famer a couple of years ago. I do. I think last season he became a first ballot Hall of Famer after another 1,000-yard season, another playoff run. And I have to come around to the take. Here's the take. Mike Evans is the greatest Tampa Bay Buccaneer of all time. And I'm going to get into it. He is the one. We have over a decade now of dominance and durability by one of the best dudes in any locker room. Now, you have to split hairs a little bit with a take like this between best Buck ever and greatest Buck ever. Has a Buccaneer ever been better at their position for a given time than Mike Evans? Maybe. But greatest, that term, I think it means ability, success, and dominance over a long period of time.
Evan, I'm going to ask you quite simply, is Mike Evans the greatest Tampa Bay Buccaneer of all time?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a debate here, right, about, and I think it comes down to 2 guys. It comes down to basically Mike Evans or, Derek Brooks, basically, because I think there are a few qualifiers. I think spending your entire career with the franchise, I think, is important. And there's been great players, fantastic players, top 5, top 10 all-time players that did not, John Lynch, Warren Sapp, those are just 2 of the notable ones that did not finish their careers, with Tampa Bay. But then you get into the guys that did, right? Mike Allstott, Rondé Barber, Derek Brooks. Derek Brooks, I believe, played 14 seasons with the Buccaneers. Right now, Mike Evans on year 11 with the Buccaneers. He signed a 2-year deal, so he's at least going to be year 12, right? So he's at least going to get to 12 years in a Buccaneers uniform. Derek Brooks has a Super Bowl. Mike Evans has a Super Bowl. Mike Evans has darn near every offensive statistic record that you can have for the Buccaneers. So today, right? That's what we're talking about, though. Right now, today, that's the conversation, and that's a tough one. That it is tough. I do look. Derek Brooks was the epitome of the Buck. I mean, literally, like the definition of like Buccaneer, basically for such a long time. I mean, he turned that franchise, was a big key at least, and turned that franchise from a loser into a winner. Won the big key in helping win the franchise's first Super Bowl. But Mike Evans is, just like Kyle Brandt said, has just been so dominant, that it is hard to sort of deny that at this point. And he stayed with them long enough, right? I think he stayed with them long enough. He's been healthy, which has been, a big key as well. So right here, right now, I would probably say maybe not right this second, but he's on track to where, to me, I'm going to say not right now, but he will be. So that's what I would say. Maybe not right this second, but like he will be. Whether he plays, whether it's this year or next year, then he hangs them up. Okay, he's been on record of saying he doesn't want to play for, a very long time. Like he's not going to play 16, 17 years in the NFL. So like the time's running out. Whether he plays, this year or next year and hangs them up, whether he, extends for another year or two, whatever, I think by the end of his career, you're going to be able to say that, yes, he is the greatest Buccaneer of all time. And I think Brandt brings up a pretty good point, because it is a debate that I think was worth having, which that in its of itself is a very big accomplishment for Mike Evans.
Yeah, and I think the arguments that'll keep people splitting hairs for the end of time, until the end of time on this argument, is just like, you had brought up the clear distinction between a player being the best at their position for a period of time, and then in Mike Evans' case, quite simply carrying the team. Like, that's the way that I look at it, because Mike Evans has been consistently great, historically great on some historically bad football teams. You know, like the Buccaneers had the number 1 overall pick headed into his second season. They were 2-14 his rookie year in the league, but somehow he was able to clear 1,000 yards, which I know some people might scoff at when you look at what the average NFL wide receiver is capable of, but the average NFL wide receiver isn't as consistent as Mike Evans. Like, they don't play every game. They don't get you those consistent numbers. And yeah, Mike has had injuries here and there, but he gets his numbers before he goes down. So, you know, Mike Evans carried the franchise. And I do think it is an unfortunate factor in the argument that not a lot of people are going to be able to get over. And it's all about how you look at it, how you choose to decide who's greater, what defines a great player. You know, if we're talking about best player in their position, Derrick Brooks had 5 first-team All-Pros.
Yeah.
I think Mike has 1.
Yeah. It does, but also, you know, you got to think of the era that you're in, right? The era, Derrick Brooks is in a different era. Mike Evans is in an era where it is offensively driven, and there are a crap ton of really good wide receivers right now.
And think of all the Hall of Famers that played next to Derrick Brooks. Mm-hmm. You know, I think the only bona fide Hall of Famers that Mike Evans has played with at this point in his career are Rob Gronkowski and Tom Brady. Mm-hmm. You know, like when you really think of these Buccaneer rosters, I cannot think of any bigger names that deserve more credit that someone would say that guy's a Hall of Famer, right? But when you look at Derrick Brooks, he was on a defense full of Hall of Famers. Because even the guys who were not Hall of Famers or weren't Hall of Famers for many, many years, like Rondé Barber, are still studs at their position. Some of the greatest of all time. So I think it's interesting. I think it's something that we could debate about until the end of time. But again, final call for phone calls here before we get to our last point of the show.
Well, and also, I also think you're going to be having this debate when Mike Evans' career is done. Yeah. I mean, this isn't just going to be something that, it's, you know, it's a closed book, right? Like, I mean, unless he plays, you know, another 3 or 4 years and just, you know, it's like just shatters every record that he's already broken, like, then it may be undisputable. But, yeah, I mean, I still think, you can have this debate right now in 2024. You can probably have this debate in 2034. Like, you know, I think you can have that debate. I will say, though, I do think Mike Evans' longevity is on his side because, look, Derrick Brooks retired in 2008. It's a long time. It's almost 20 years ago at this point. You know, the people that are going to be watching and analyzing and having this conversation 10 years from now aren't really going to remember Derrick Brooks as much as they're going to remember Mike Evans. So that he has something playing for him as well. Look, they're both fantastic football players, right? You saying, you know, Derrick Brooks played on a defense with Hall of Famers. That's not you saying Derrick Brooks is a scrub. Derrick Brooks was a fantastic player. But you got to look at who was throwing Mike Evans the football. You know, in 2014, it was Josh McCown and Mike Glennon. Then he had a long stretch where it was Jameis Winston. Okay, Winston, you know, he had his ups and downs, but the ups were very up. The highs were very high. Ryan Fitzpatrick, sort of the same thing. The highs were very high. Then you get to Tom Brady, and now you go on to Baker Mayfield. So he's done it with multiple quarterbacks, multiple offensive systems, multiple head coaches, multiple eras of football here for the Buccaneers. And Derrick Brooks did go through some eras, right? He did. He went through, you know, he wore a creamsicle jersey, right? And then he wore the red, right? So he was with Dungy, and then he was with Gruden, and then, you know, he was with Monty Kiffin pretty much the whole way, though. So yeah, it was it's a very interesting and fun debate, I think, but it's something to where Mike Evans and Derrick Brooks, they both have their own qualities about them that make them, I think, almost 1A and 1B when you're talking about, you know, the greatest Buccaneer of all time. And like I said, maybe today, right now, Derrick Brooks, you know, spending that amount of time with the Buccaneers, maybe that helps his case. But Mike Evans is going to be the greatest Buccaneer of all time when it's all said and done, which is, unfortunately, guys, like, it's probably sooner rather than later. But hey, I think he's got a couple years in him.
Let me throw this out there for you, and this is kind of taking it to a bigger level here when we talk about the grand scheme of Mike Evans and his NFL legacy. 3-4 more years of production at this level. And by at this level, I mean, last year he led the NFL in touchdowns. So he may not be the yardage leader every year, but he leads in
which
touchdowns.
he rarely was, honestly. Like he wasn't really often the yardage leader.
He's productive. He's consistent. And again, like I said, he carried this offense for many, many years. 3-4 more years of production at this level. Is he one of the greatest wide receivers of all time? Maybe top 3?
I mean, he's got the accolades to do it. I mean, he has the like I say, he has the Super Bowl, he has the Pro Bowls. I think you're looking at top 3 of all time, and you have to sort of look at it and be like, okay, like, well, you got Randy Moss, Jerry Rice, like, how does he stack up against those guys? I'm not really sure about but like I think, again, there's a lot of receiving talent. There's a lot of really, really good receiving talent, not just in today's NFL, but the history of the NFL. When talking about a lot of different guys, so it is tough to exactly rank him on where he ranks among the all-time guys. When it's all said and done, I think more accolades would help. I think more Pro Bowls would help. Maybe another Super Bowl, down the line, that would help. I wouldn't go, I doubt he probably would be able to finish like a top 3 wide receiver. Maybe in the eyes of like Bucs fans, but I'm talking like consensusly, but I think he could very well finish in like the top 10. I still think, we have there's so much receiver talent like that's already happened, and there's so much receiver talent that's already here right now that like it's going to be tough. But I mean, in the top 10 with how many good wide receivers there have been in the history of the NFL, that's not a slouch shot.
You're right. I think there's going to be a lot of records that he's able to claim before the end of his career that will separate him a little bit more from the other guys who are held in a similar light. But he's been so massively underrated for so long at this point that it's like, it feels like more of the same. He feels like a guy that most of the average NFL fans, most of the casual people who just don't watch the Bucs,
I feel like they think he's good, but they don't realize how good.
Right, and I don't think people are going to realize how good he is until he's gone.
Yeah,
until he's hung it up, and there's these young wide receivers who are chasing records, and they're chasing Mike Evans. Like, this guy's looking to become the first wide receiver in NFL history to do this since Randy Moss and Mike Evans. Things like that, I think, are going to start popping up more. His presence in the NFL history books. Again, I think he's just so vastly underrated throughout his entire career. My heart says he's the greatest Tampa Bay Buccaneer of all time. Now, my brain can understand the conversation and the different points of views people are going to have, right? People grew up in different eras. People watch different styles of football. People have different things that determine wins and losses to them on a team. Like, Mike Evans carrying a football team for 7 years before Tom Brady got here might not have been important.
Right. When they were going 6-10, like,
right.
Nobody really.
Like, there's just some things that people see differently, and I understand that. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to force my view onto anyone else, but I do think Kyle Brandt here is right on the money. As a Mike Evans for lifer, I grew up watching this guy play. He's my favorite Tampa Bay Buccaneer of all time, and I think when it's all said and done, his legacy in Tampa Bay, recency bias aside, his legacy in Tampa Bay will be up there with the likes of Derek Brooks and especially a Leroy Selman, I think. So I think he's the greatest Buck of all time. But, I've always been a little biased, like I said. I think in the day and age of especially, what the offense means, what a productive offense means, and a productive wide receiver. And he did it on a lot of shitty football teams. So I appreciate him that much more for it. He made those bad teams fun to watch. So just a good discussion. I think it's a lot of back and forth, and always interested to hear everybody's takes. So last call for the phones before we get to this last topic, 305-224-1968. The meeting ID on your screen, 747-973-0150. Evan, I wanted to wrap up talking a little bit more about the offense, but talking about a specific position group on the offense here. A couple of skill players, and that is running back Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. And to be honest, this conversation feels like from the moment they drafted Bucky Irving and people started to realize the potential this guy has, it seems like this conversation was inevitable. But after seeing Bucky Irving average, 7 yards per carry in his NFL debut. And I know Rachaad White was able to make some great plays catching the football out of the backfield, went, I think, 6 receptions for 70 plus. So he's got his own way of being productive for this Buccaneers offense, but a lot of people are going to beg the question, is Bucky Irving eventually going to, take these carries away from Rachaad White? Because as you have said, and pretty much everyone else, I think Scott Reynolds already talked about this as well. These guys have two very different styles, and I think the Bucs offense has room for both of them. But when we talk about just running the football, I think before the end of the year, Bucky Irving's going to be your guy.
It's an interesting conversation because it's almost like, that shiny new toy thing, right? Rachaad White's been here. It's his 3rd year. And, the shiny new toy is Bucky Irving, the new rookie running back. Rachaad White was pretty good against Washington, though, just in other ways. Recorded a career high 107 yards after the catch against Washington. So, was really good. He just running the ball. Some of the lanes weren't there, and that's not to say he was bad. Sometimes he made something out of nothing, like oftentimes. So, I understand. Like I get it where the thought process is coming from, because you look at those two guys and you compare them, and there's just the more exciting player is probably Bucky Irving, just because it's just the burst, the acceleration, the hitting the hole immediately. Just it looks flashier, looks quicker, and that's not to say that Rachaad White isn't. It's just Bucky Irving's just a little bit better at that. So I would say that it's week 1. Let's see how the rest of maybe ask it again week 7, week 8. I think as these guys are still trying to find their roles exactly in this offense. I still think, like I said, they're trying to work out the kinks of a brand new offense. So I wouldn't exactly go and say, well, I think Bucky Irving's going to overtake Rachaad White now. That doesn't mean that maybe Bucky Irving gets a little bit more snaps, perhaps. That's a possibility. Yeah, that wouldn't shock me. But I do think, especially because of Rachaad White's receiving ability, I think they really want to take advantage of that. You saw it on Sunday that they want to include that in their offense. So I think that helps as well. That helps White's case. And again, it's something to where maybe by the end of the season, it's more of a 50-50. Right now, I would still say Rachaad White's the main guy, with Bucky Irving being that complimentary piece. But would it shock me if Bucky Irving was the starting running back in the end of the season? Probably not. Like I wouldn't say it would shock me. But I don't think a lot of people are talking about Rachaad White like he had a terrible day, on Sunday running the ball, and it's because it's the Bucs. Sometimes they were. It was funny, watching the game with my dad, and a lot of times we're looking, and he had mentioned the one time, like, man, like, Irvin looks good, but White is getting like the kind of like the crap situations, to put it nicely. Obvious running downs, or when Washington's stacking the box, that's when they're giving it to Rachaad White. So he didn't have the best situations, and like I said, sometimes he made something out of nothing. But I get it. But I would still expect Rachaad White to be the team's running back 1 for at least the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's taken that job or those carries away from him anytime soon. But just like you had brought up, it's also important to mention that the offensive line and the running lanes that are available whenever they decide to give him the football, all of that context matters. And there were definitely a couple of moments where the offensive line last Sunday could have been better. Graham Barton, the interior offensive line. We talked about Cody Mount kind of having an up and down day. Graham Barton, he showed some strength and some power here and there, but definitely some things to be worked on. So consistency with this offensive line was a huge talking point coming into the year, because last year everybody's so high on Rachaad White as an all-around do-it-all back that, they're just saying, well, he just needs an offensive line. And that statement definitely still applies. So the Buccaneers offense did look as good as it did on Sunday, putting up 37 points. Don't forget, could have been more if you take away some mistakes. But if the offensive line, if those run lanes are readily available, consistently available, and these guys are just consistently opening things up, then that's where you see this run game being taken to the next level that we've heard about for so long. But I think this debate is going to be hot after week one. One, because people love arguing. I think there's always going to be, when you've got two running backs, you've got sections of the fan base that are just going to kind of pick the guy that they like. It happens like that, So with that being said, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about this year. But as I had mentioned earlier, luckily, the Bucs have an offense under Liam Cohen. Hopefully, when this thing is fleshed out, I think they have plenty of room to accommodate both of these guys and really let them shine with what they're good at. And, Rachaad White, we know that's mostly being a receiving back like we saw in week one. And then Bucky Irving, we'll wait and see. But 7 yards per carry ain't too bad.
I think you kind of saw the thing about, the offense basically has room for both of them. I think you kind of saw a glimpse of that on Sunday of what, their roles could be. So I'm curious to see how they I guess mold into those roles as the season goes on. I am curious to see because things can change and roles can change, and I am curious to see like I said, come week 7, week 8, how that shakes out. What are the roles then? What are the snap counts like then? What situations are they being put in then? Who's who on third down? All right, who's in there now? Who's taking some of the screens? Rachaad White, I think, is a much better receiver than Bucky Irving is. Not saying that Bucky Irving can't do it. I just think White's better. I think White's patience helps him as a receiver. But Bucky Irving also has more of that home run threat, right? That home run ability to where I think he can not necessarily. It's not like a Chris Johnson where anytime he touches the ball, he can take it to the house. But there's more. There's like I said, there's just more burst there, more speed, more agility, and that plays into it. And again, that's just the difference in style of guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he is a little more, not boom or bust, but prone to breaking those big runs that develop quickly. A very quick 20, 30-yard gain. We saw a couple of those, or so we saw at least one in his debut on Sunday. But yeah, just a great conversation to have, and I think there is going to be a lot of talking to be had about this Buccaneers roster over the next couple of weeks, just between injuries and the level of opponent that they are about to play. We're going to find out a lot more about this Bucs team in week 2 than we did in week 1, so hopefully it is more good, but a true test on the way in the Detroit Lions. And this Friday, we will be live here on YouTube for our game preview episode. We're going to be chopping it up once again with our guys from the Bleav in Lions podcast. Former Detroit Lion Glover Quinn will join us once again. Excited to hear his insight and thoughts on what the matchup looks like this year. It's a shame, in a way, because every time we have these guys on, the numbers are awesome. The support, the new listeners, the new viewers that we get. For some reason, the Lions fans, they love our show. They love our podcast, and we love to have them.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Yeah.
But every time we have them on, they lose. Like the Bucs lose. They were 0-2 last year.
The Lions have had the Bucs number for the last couple of times. So
man, they were 2 of our most downloaded and viewed shows last year when the Bucs played the Lions, and both times, the Bucs just could not get the job done. So hopefully,
third time's a charm, maybe.
Yeah, right. That's what they say. We got a playoff rematch, matchup happening for us in week 2 here. Some old NFC Central rivals meet again. Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions. Should be a good game. Excited to dive into it and hear what Glover Quinn and the boys have to say. But that is going to do it for today's episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I want to thank you, each and every person, for checking in, listening, chiming in, wherever you were hanging out with us. We do appreciate you. Clack 5 White, Christopher Cole, MK, Chris Mail over on the YouTube side of things. Thank you guys once again. Follow the show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And, of course, Tampa Bay Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, you can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram at Bucs_daily. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL and check out his written work at BucsNation.com. What have you got this week?
You're going to have the X Factor for the Buccaneers and Lions game coming out later this week. So I'm going to be picking one player each week. We'll be doing this. We're going to be picking one player that I just think is sort of critical for to play well and ensure a Buccaneers victory. So stay tuned for that on BucsNation.com.
Slim Stank with a great point to bring this thing home. He says, I'd rather lose in the season and win in the playoffs. So,
there you go.
keep that in mind. If this season shakes out the way that we hope it does for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this may not be the last time.
Last year, the Bucs did both, though. So.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Hopefully this year's a little bit different. Hopefully, if these two teams meet, which if the Bucs want to go where they want to go, they may have to go through the Lions. So we'll see.
Absolutely. Going to be quite the test for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, signing off my co-host, Evan Wanish. We will talk to you in the next one. Until then, and as always, thank you for listening, and go Bucs.